Hi, today we will talk about Egyptian architecture and more specifically about Egyptian tombs. Egyptian culture is one of the cultures that is the most distinguishable because they have an importance for the cult of the dead. As you might know, in ancient Egypt, when someone dies, they are mummified, and that's what makes them mummies. They have specific rituals and cults, and they also developed a monumental architecture of the tombs. Their culture and religion are very important to them. They have also a strong connection to the afterlife, and that is why in tombs they always give objects to the dead or they represent drawings of people partying, of games, of the pleasures of life that they believe the dead will need in its afterlife. So there are five types of tombs in ancient Egypt. There are mastabas, underground tomb, pyramids, mortuary temples, and rock cut tombs. In this first part, we will talk about early forms of Egyptian tombs. The first ever and earliest above ground tombs are mastabas. They seem like a simple structure, but they're more sophisticated than they appear. They are structures and constructions with a horizontal base and mostly constructed in rocks that has developed over time. It has always been bigger and bigger and it has been transformed. What we see from the exterior is not like in the interior. There's actually a funeral chamber underground, and they put a very important distance from the base to the ground, and it is called the Chamber of Ka. The Ka in Egyptian language means soul. And this Ka protects the entrance of the mastaba, but also protects the body, the mummy. It is represented mostly with a statue. It's a portrait of divinity with the cult of the dead. For the materials, it's also mud brick. The burial chamber is surrounded by storage rooms. They are also decorated with beautiful stones, and it is only for the dead because nobody would actually go in. For the decorations, they give an importance to the natural elements. For example, there are columns with the capitals that represents the papyrus plant because they need to put some nature into the structure. The nature has to be represented in their architecture. It is something that is symbolic. They are transferring something symbolic onto the rock. Then a bit later, the mastaba included what we call a serdab, and an offering chamber for the royal Egyptian tomb. Mastabas are actually for high ranked people, for nobility, and we have an example of a mastaba. It's the mastaba of Pharaoh in Saqqara in 2510 BC. Now, we will see another type of tomb, the underground tomb. They return to earth instead of having the big mastabas on top of the ground. They developed burial structures that are more sophisticated. And the reason why they return to Earth is their desire to increase the security of the dead body. In the underground tombs, we can see there are also chambers, corridors, that is, of course, always decorated. And we can see this sort of change because of the rise of social hierarchy and a growing importance of the pharaoh, and it also provides a larger space for them. There is one example of an underground tomb that is the al-Kab in 3010 BC. Now we can talk about the second part of this podcast, monumental tombs in ancient Egypt. So remember that I talked about the five types, and now we're going to talk about the pyramids, but also about the mortuary temples and the rock cut tombs. For the pyramids, it began in Saqqara. King Zoser in 2750 BC wanted a resident of the afterlife, and he made a replica of the royal palace that he had. It was assisted by Imhotep, the first ever recorded architect in history, and instead of using baked bricks like they did for the mastabas, they used cut stones. The first ever pyramid were not like the pyramids we know today. There are huge pyramids like there are smaller pyramids, and a lot of funeral chambers in it. There are galleries to go to the chamber of the king, and also galleries to go to the chamber of the queen, that is always below the king's and always smaller. They had a technique to construct and transport those very big rocks, they would pull the rocks, but someone would be on top of it and pour water on the sand. By doing so, the sand becomes a surface that is resistant and smooth, so they can push the stones easily. And that's how they managed to pull all the cut stones to create the pyramids. The thing that I didn't mention was the symbol of the pyramids. There are like stairways to the sky, a stairway to heaven, and we have examples like Pharaoh Cheops constructed the pyramid that is then the equilateral triangle that we know today. That is called the Great Pyramid at Giza in 2570 BC. Anyway, now we are going to talk about the mortuary temples. It's Egypt's most important monumental form with 3 interconnected units. A valley temple near the river where the king's body is embalmed, and the mortuary temple at the foot of the pyramid where they do rituals. And then a long, narrow causeway that connects the 2 structures. And most of the time, we can see some colossal sphinx that is represented as the god that is on guard over the king's tomb. For example, the Karnak and Luxor temples that are connected by the sphinx. Finally, we have the rock-cut tombs. We can see an example of Beni Hassan. It's a sort of cave with interior columns. And in the Beni Hassan one, they copied the lotus plant. Again, this is something that is natural that they put in the tombs to have this symbolic natural thing. They're usually painted, and there are columns that are just for representation, and the columns are not really useful. Like, it doesn't actually hold anything. It's not structurally important. It's just symbolic. And they're one of the first Doric columns, but they're not Doric because that's like later in Greece, but we called it Proto-Doric. So yeah, in conclusion, we have 5 types of tombs, and they're all very important, representing their beliefs, their culture, and religion. We can see it also from the decorations that they put. And thanks to these tombs, we can also see the advanced architectural skills and engineering of the ancient Egyptians from the early mastaba to the Grand Pyramids. Each tomb represents a remarkable feat of construction, demonstrating the mastery of the designs, the mathematics, and structural stability. And they are always preserved. There is always preservation of artifacts that we can see today, and this evolution left a mark on Egyptian history and archaeology. Thanks to it, we can also understand its social hierarchy and understand the history of Egypt better. And today, it always attracts tourists from all around the world to see and understand the history and all of that. Thank you so much for listening.